Happy 68th birthday to one of the unquestioned acting GOATs, two-time Academy Award winner, Tom Hanks. We're back in the studio for episode 242 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Tuesday afternoon here with me in New York. Once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Today is Tom Hanks' 68th birthday. Now, I would say that I have been a fan of his for 40 years. So he was just a kid, grad school age, maybe slightly older, when he first came onto the radar with the movie Splash. I know that he also did a pretty shitty comedy that's kind of remembered well by many Gen Xers called Bachelor Party, but it's not good. It's not good. I've seen it. It's just trash. And he did the TV show Bosom Buddies, I want to say right around the same time as Bachelor Party and Slash, maybe just before. It's kind of crazy the way these things work, that in Bosom Buddies and his co-star on the show, Peter Scolari, he had a career, but there isn't anyone who could have watched Bosom Buddies, or even if you didn't know about the movie Splash, when Tom appeared as, on the show Family Ties, Michael J. Fox's uncle, Ned, you wouldn't look at that guy and say, oh my God, this is the next Gary Cooper right here. This is the next Robert Mitchum right here. The next Richard Widmark, the next Burt Lancaster. No, he just seemed like interesting looking guy. Line readings indicate he has an idea what he's doing, but he wasn't lighting anything on fire. He wasn't setting records. He was just an actor, seemingly. Whereas the aforementioned Michael J. Fox, once he started clicking on Family Ties, everyone knew this is not just a sitcom star, a kid who knows how to read his lines and hit laugh lines and hit his marks. This is somebody who is destined for greatness. Tom Hanks did not immediately seem to be destined for greatness, although he was popular. The show Bosom Buddies isn't really that good. It's kind of offensive, and I don't think that it would be made today, or if it were made, it would have to be pitched at a different angle, I believe, because it is possible, like the movie White Chicks, you can do that kind of thing. They did it in Three's Company, where the entire premise hangs upon the main character of Jack Tripper pretending to be gay when he's not, so he can live with the two women, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But Tom Hanks, after Splash, he did other movies that really weren't very good, like The Man with One Red Shoe. He did Volunteers with his pal, the late, great John Candy, who he worked with in Splash. Hanks' performance is not really that great. If you go back now with the incredible dramatic performances he's given and you assess what he does in Splash, I mean, John Candy and Eugene Levy are what you remember about that movie. Hanks is the star, and his character of Alan Bauer does almost nothing memorable. He is a very reactive protagonist, and it's up to John Candy to kind of get the laughs and Eugene Levy to get the hysterics. You look at Hanks' career path, though, and you see someone who was never satisfied doing what he was doing at that particular time. He always wanted to do something else and something more. And although he doesn't seem like this sort of personality, or at least he's never seemed like this sort of personality to me, I believe that he burned for greatness, that he understood at a young age that he was fortunate to be in this business, to have gotten as far as he did when he was making films such as The Money Pit with Shelley Long, which has its defenders, but the movie is not good. It's just not good. Although I guarantee you, there's some of you out there right now that say, "This fucking idiot, that movie was a scream." Okay, well, you're entitled. Comedy is very subjective. I didn't think it was funny. But he wanted to do more than just show up on set, do his lines, and collect a paycheck. And he's talked about this in interviews, that at a certain point, he felt that he could do more and be more. And he resolved to, you can't really change your acting style, but you can make modifications and adjustments to not fall back on certain actorly tics or certain kinds of movements, facial expressions. You know, George Clooney, they used to talk about the fact that he would do this thing where he put his head down and he would look at people almost through his eyelashes. And he did it on ER. He did it so much that people started making fun of him for doing that and suggesting, listen, George, you're a great looking dude. You are a good actor. You have the ability to hold a close-up, hold a camera. You have a perfect gaze for this. Stop doing that head bob thing that you do. Just do something else. Tom Hanks strove to do something else. And you can see in certain films that have dramatic content, such as Nothing in Common, where he plays Jackie Gleason's son, you see him starting to register a little bit differently. But he was still young. He was still in his 20s. And there are some people who come out firing in their 20s as dynamic, dramatic performers, like Brando, for example, Burton, if you want to throw him in there, Olivier, if you want to go back a million years ago, hell, Dustin Hoffman in The Graduate as young as he was. But not everybody is nailing it and giving Academy Award-worthy performances right out of the gate. Hanks wasn't really a slow learner or a slow developer. He just needed time. He needed more seasoning. He was not Dustin Hoffman in The Graduate in those early movies. Because The Graduate is kind of a comedy drama. It has stretches where it plays like a comedy and then stretches where it plays like soap opera dramatics in a good way. In films like Every Time We Say Goodbye and Punchline, which is a comedy drama, I didn't think it was funny at all. And Hanks, no offense, is not a good stand-up comic. I'm glad that he didn't go that route. Sally Field isn't funny either. It was kind of the point of the movie that these were two ordinary people. In the case of Hanks, he was going to be a doctor. And Sally was a housewife. And that film is very strange. Hanks' performance is just okay. And the kind of Hollywood joke is he's set up as a possible love interest for Sally. 6 years later in Forrest Gump, they're playing mother and son. Life is like a box of chocolates, Forrest. You never know what you're going to get. Hollywood. Ageism. By the time Hanks made the movie big, you could see him coming across in a different fashion. He's holding the camera for a split second longer before delivering his lines. Now, if the director objects to that, it ain't gonna work. But he's doing something different, starting with Big, than he had done previously, even in the dramatic films. His line readings seem a little bit different, a little bit more like an actor who is thinking about and thinking as the character, as opposed to a terrific young actor reading lines. And I would say, if you compare what he does in the dramatic scenes in Nothing in Common with Jackie Gleason, and Gleason, to his credit, I mean, he was getting older, he wasn't feeling great, but he gave Hanks plenty of room to do his shtick in that movie. And if you watch the film, it's shocking to think that Tom Hanks worked with Jackie Gleason. He probably shot a month and a half's worth of scenes together. But you can see, it appears that Gleason really liked him. That's how it's always come across to me. But by the time of the movie Big, he's got better control of his face, and his line readings sound less like an actor reading lines and more like Joshua Baskin, the character he's supposed to play. it's strange because Hanks he's not a quirky performer per se. He doesn't do anything unusual on screen where there are certain actors or actresses you can point to and say, oh, they always, like a Jennifer Jason Leigh, you say, yeah, she always goes for the kind of unusual, off the beaten path. But Hanks has had a number of movies that I think suck, which had fierce defenders. Like I said, The Money Pit. And there are people right now that swear that The Burbs is a kind of slept-on masterpiece. I've seen it twice. I think the film is horrendous. It's horrible. But there are people who will say, no, Bruce Dern, Artie Johnson, Henry Gibson, it's hilarious. It's the fucking Rick Dukeman. No, it doesn't work. Joe versus the Volcano is another one. It's a culty film. That one is at least okay. Turner and Hooch, I'm sorry, it's not good. He looks good. He had great chemistry with the dog, but the film it doesn't work. So if I'm looking at the first chunk of Tom Hanks's movie career, starting with Bachelor Party, Big, to me, is an almost unquestioned masterpiece. It is a perfect blend of fantasy and comedy and heart-tugging drama. It's almost perfect. Incredible direction from Penny Marshall. Penny Marshall, the answer to a trivia question. First female director to have a Hollywood film gross over $100 million. Penny Marshall, late of Laverne and Shirley, a classic sitcom. But through Joe versus the Volcano, only Big is a great movie as far as I'm concerned. I like a lot of Splash, but I think that the last 15 minutes of Splash are so bad that it ruins what came before. It's just, I used to watch the film up to a certain point and then just turn it off. So, because I just totally rejected the ending. I said, man, what a joke. And it wasn't even, they sold out. No, just picked a shitty ending. That was the worst possible of all of the outcomes, of all the iterations that could have taken place in Splash. They're like, well, let's go with the worst one. Yes. What are you going to do? Sometime in late 1989, with all of this, and Tom had been nominated for Best Actor for Big, so he was being taken seriously as a performer, not just a light comedian, a good old Tom Hanks, he's cute. No, he was being taken seriously. And there are people to this day who will say, if Dustin Hoffman did not win the Oscar that year, it should have been Tom. There were people who say it should have been the other Tom, Tom Cruise, who was in the same movie with Dustin, and his character is actually three-dimensional and grows and changes and feels the weight of the events of the story in the final part of the film. Whereas Dustin's character, he's an autistic savant. He's exactly the same at the beginning or at the end. Technically an incredible performance. From a craftsmanship perspective, Hoffman is extraordinary. But character itself, either of the Toms, to me, that year would have been a better Best Actor pick than Dustin. And I'm as big a Dustin Hoffman fan as there is. Dustin, Jack, Beatty, Redford. The four kings. Love them all. But Hanks, again, wanted to challenge himself. He was still so young. He was in his early 30s when he wrapped work on Joe versus the Volcano. And he signed on to do a movie that I've discussed on the channel, The Bonfire of the Vanities. And The Bonfire of the Vanities is going to take up a chunk of this particular episode because it was an enormous turning point from every conceivable angle in the career and life of Tom Hanks. So The Bonfire of the Vanities was a best-selling novel. And not just any best-selling novel, because there are best-selling novels like Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code, which everybody agrees this book is shit, but people read it anyway. And then there are novels where they're guilty pleasure type of books, maybe very well written, but that the story, it's basically potboiler territory. I'm sorry if you don't know what a potboiler is. It doesn't mean it isn't entertaining, but you're not talking great literature. The Bonfire of the Vanities encompassed all that could be great about fiction, in that it told a compelling story with fictional characters. And there are real people that appear here and there in Bonfire of the Vanities, but it's sort of an alternate New York City in the 1980s. And people who are making way too much money for their station, people who really don't have any discernible skills and are multimillionaires, and they're a little bit too high on the hog, and they need to come back. They need to come back to us a little bit. The main character of Tom Wolfe's now legendary, iconic bestseller, Bonfire of the Vanities, is a Wall Street bond trader named Sherman McCoy. Now, Hanks was younger than McCoy is presented in the book. But Hanks wanted to do it because this was a prestige project. He'd already had a taste of being nominated for an Oscar. And here, now he didn't say this, but you can assume he saw an opportunity. This is an incredible book. I love this character. I love the way he gets a comeuppance. I don't want to spoil too much, but the studio saw Oscar nominations across the board if they did it right, because the book was just so damned impressive. And it cut across all lines that everybody raved about this book, because Tom Wolfe did not play any favorites. Every socioeconomic arena, every class of people, every ethnicity, everyone gets blasted here. The worst, Wolfe did not give a shit. He was it's a satire, is what I'm saying. He didn't care who he offended, and normally that's problematic, but it was the way that Tom Wolfe did it. He had such a balance. He wasn't saying that everyone who is in their 30s and white is awful or deserves to get the shit beat out of them. But he showed there are always going to be bad actors in our midst. And those are the people he went after, regardless of where they were in life or who they were. If the mayor of New York City was an asshole and he happened to be white, he's going to feel the flame. If the chief of staff of the mayor happened to be Jewish and he was a piece of crap, he's going to feel the flame. Wolfe just laid waste to everything. Everybody took it. And there was the opportunity for a great black comedy movie, like a Dr. Strangelove. This was what the filmmaker Brian De Palma, who had done Scarface in the early 80s, and he was coming off a brilliant film, Casualties of War, that bombed hugely at the box office. It was very expensive, and it was put through under the shepherdship of the late Dawn Steele, one of the kind of pioneering forerunner female producers who was very, very influential and powerful. Not quite on the level of Sherry Lansing, but Dawn Steele was the head of a major studio. Like, she was not just somebody who happened into that job. She was brilliant. And she helped push Brian De Palma's Casualties of War through because she believed in the project. When it bombed, it crushed her in every way. But De Palma was in a situation where he was going to have to take the next big project that came across his desk. And I, to this day, have no idea if he really liked the book, Bonfire of the Vanities, or whether he thought he could make a great movie out of it. But it was a huge gig. And thank goodness he's getting the job, because Casualties bombed despite the best efforts of Sean Penn and Michael J. Fox, among others, John Leguizamo, John C. Reilly. Just an incredible cast and a great Vietnam film, but very depressing. More than very depressing. I mean, Platoon and Full Metal Jacket and Apocalypse Now are very depressing. Casualties of War has a special tier in the hell of depressing movies. And I mean that as a compliment, but it's a difficult watch. But they had De Palma, they got Bruce Willis, they got Melanie Griffith. That was part of the problem. Bruce Willis was miscast. Melanie Griffith was miscast. Morgan Freeman as a judge was miscast. Alan King as a multimillionaire, the husband of Melanie Griffith, he was miscast. And sadly, Tom Hanks was also miscast. Now, when my dad read the book, and when the movie was in production, he expressed concern all the way back in 1990. This is something you can Google. There was an Esquire magazine with Tom Hanks on the cover. It was either Esquire or GQ. I don't want to give you bad information. And Tom, looking confident, looking good. And it said, "The real McCoy?" ? Tom Hanks in Bonfire of the Vanities. And that was a question. And my dad was already a Tom Hanks fan. But in 1990, my dear old dad, the C in that company right there, Alan Philip Cohen, he said that Sherman McCoy should be played by William Hurt, because McCoy was written as young, haughty, condescending, patrician. Tom Hanks is none of those things. But Brian De Palma said the reason why he cast Tom Hanks is because he didn't want the audience to hate Sherman McCoy. Because yes, he gets a bit of a comeuppance, but he's not supposed to be a bad person. He is somebody that is in a situation and acts badly, but at his core, he is not an evil man. And De Palma didn't think that, and it wouldn't have been William Hurt anyway. William Hurt was busy doing other stuff. He was working like crazy back then. He did Until the End of the World with Wim Wenders, and then he did The Doctor, which I consider to be his best performance by far in any movie. That came out summer 91, so like 6-7 months after Bonfire. But Until the End of the World was a very difficult shoot. It's kind of a mind-bending science fiction film. They just had the wrong take with Bonfire. It wasn't funny, and it wasn't dramatic, and it ended up being a significant disaster. It got trashed by critics. The Rotten Tomatoes score, I think, is in the high teens or 20s. It's not as bad as that. If you watch it now, it's the kind of movie that probably plays a lot better now, especially if you don't know that it was based on a best-selling book. If you just walk in cold, to see all of the actors that you love so young, even Morgan, more than 3 decades ago, and Bruce was still more or less on the rise. The first Die Hard, the second Die Hard, Bruce was doing it, and Melanie Griffith had recently been nominated for Oscar for Working Girl, and the movie just bombed with audiences, bombed with critics, and Hanks was crushed. He was really devastated. And it's the sort of film where almost everybody involved, it's like they were lying to themselves during production, because there is a book, which I've discussed on the channel, called The Devil's Candy by a Wall Street Journal reporter named Julie Salomon. And that book, it's the single best book ever written about Hollywood. I'll go down on that hill. It's better than Final Cut by Stephen Bach about the making of Heaven's Gate. It's better than either of William Goldman's books, which are both incredible, Adventures in the Screen Trade and Which Lie Did I Tell? But what Devil's Candy does is take the reader literally behind the scenes of a major, massive Hollywood production. And it shows us a disaster occurring in real time. And the only person among the cast and crew who knew that they were fucked was Bruce Willis. God bless Bruce Willis, another guy I absolutely adore. I'm just as gutted as everyone else that his health at not a very old age took such a horrendous final turn for the worse. But Bruce Willis, throughout production, there were numerous scenes that he knew his actor sense was telling him this doesn't work. And I don't know if Morgan Freeman just was afraid to say something in his scenes, or whether Tom didn't want to rock the boat, which wouldn't surprise me. De Palma could be a very imperious presence. He was a tough filmmaker, New York or Columbia grad right there. But Bruce Willis seemed to know they were fucked. And in Julie Salomon's book, there were many points where Bruce asks to confer with the director. And he called him out the first time, and De Palma wasn't having it, and asked Bruce, he said, listen, please, I love that you want to collaborate, please, but don't do it in front of, don't embarrass me. Oh shit, Brian, I'm sorry. No, it's okay. Just please don't do that again. So Willis was constantly conferring with De Palma because he knew the film was fucked. But after the failure of Bonfire, Hanks kind of went below the radar for a while, and he's talked in interviews about how he could have just retired right there. He'd already made enormous amounts of money. But he stopped, took a breath, and he just said, I knew that I could do more. I knew that I could do more than I had done. Sometimes it's just a matter of the material, picking better projects. But other times, it's focusing on your craft to an even greater extent. And I feel like in his case, it was both. In some quarters, the movie Philadelphia, which is 1993, and won Tom his first Best Actor Oscar. In some quarters, the film was criticized because it doesn't take a particularly realistic approach to any of the topics it gets into. It's not a very realistic depiction of AIDS. They get some of the physical stuff right, but there were a lot of people that I know who I respect that had major issues with the way that the disease was depicted in that film. And the way the relationship between Tom and Antonio was depicted, it could have done a better job. And the court case is a little bit overwrought. And the other problem is, it has to be said, this is another case where I think they gave the Best Actor award to the wrong guy. Because Denzel Washington, as Joe Miller in that film, gives what I believe to be the single best performance of his incredibly prolific and extraordinary career. The character of Joe Miller starts the movie as a bigot. He hates gay people. He's afraid he might get AIDS if he shakes hands with an Andrew Beckett, that's Tom's character, for example. And through his encounter, through his friendship with Tom's character of Andrew Beckett, Joe Miller grows and changes. And Denzel is so good, the careful calibration of the performance, it's a thing of beauty. I like the movie, 3.5 stars out of 4, but I understand that the people who don't like it and who have issues with it, and many people I remember at the time in the gay community saying, don't even bother seeing this is atrocious. I think the movie is worth seeing. And Tom's performance is very solid. I just happen to think that his co-star outshines him. Forrest Gump, I've just talked about it on the channel. I really like his performance there. It has a comedic tilt to it, but ultimately, Forrest Gump's story is tragic because the girl he loved didn't love him back. And it's almost like with all the money that he made, he really just wanted people to like him, and he wanted to be friends with as many people as he could. And people he cared about died. And you can see that story as a tragedy. Now, oddly enough, if somebody were to put a metaphorical gun to my head and say, what is my favorite Tom Hanks, if I say favorite performance, best film, if I have to combine the two of them, not just movie, I'm going to say Apollo 13. I think Tom's performance in that movie is as good as either of his Oscar-winning turns in Philadelphia and Forrest Gump. Apollo 13, which I also just talked about, is an out-and-out masterpiece. Now, if you ask another question, what is the most entertaining film that Tom Hanks ever made in his career? I'm going to say Catch Me If You Can, where he was a late entry. That role of Carl Hanratty was supposed to be James Gandolfini, and Gandolfini had to drop out because it's fucking Hollywood, and Leonardo DiCaprio, who was ready to go, they were days from opening the filming of Catch Me If You Can, when DiCaprio's agent got a call from Martin Scorsese. Leo had wrapped work quite some time prior on Gangs of New York, and Scorsese said, I don't believe this, Steven, I can't believe I'm doing this to you, but I need the kid back for a couple of weeks. I am so fucking sorry, but I need the kid back, meaning DiCaprio. So what that meant was James Gandolfini, who had a very limited time window, had to drop out. Hanks had to come in. And Tom Hanks, you want to talk about a craftsman? At that point in his career, he was nailing it on every fucking cylinder. He did Road to Perdition, where he essentially plays a horrible man who we still root for. It's the Clint Eastwood, Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, where he's horrendous, but everyone around him is even worse. John Sullivan is not a good man, but he's going to protect his son from his own life as best as he can. But Hanks he didn't have much time to prepare for Catch Me If You Can. He mastered a very tricky New England accent in 2 days. Every scene with Tom Hanks in Catch Me If You Can was shot over an 8-day stretch because he didn't have any more time than that. He had all kinds of projects percolating, and he didn't have any time. He said, Steven, I can give you maybe 10 days tops. Okay, thank you. And they made a movie. And if we're being honest, James Gandolfini was a fantastic actor. Still hurts that he's been gone 11 years. But for that role of Carl Hanratty in the movie that Spielberg was trying to make with the father-son angle, I don't think it works with James Gandolfini. It certainly wouldn't work as well. Because yes, Tom wants to catch him, but he doesn't want to hurt him. And it's hard to imagine Tony Soprano himself playing that role and us not thinking he wants to put the kid 6 feet under. He wants to put him in a box. By the book. Tom Hanks has continued to work, and he's talented enough where he's given some, what I think are some lousy performances. I didn't like the Elvis movie. Austin Butler, terrific. The kid's awesome, right? But whatever Tom was trying to do with Colonel Tom Parker, it was a miss. It doesn't work. And it's one of those performances, it made best actor and worst actor. When you're nominated for awards like Oscars, although not in that year, but if you're nominated for Oscars and Razzies, I mean, that's something. That's something. But then again, the movie Don't Look Up with DiCaprio and Jennifer Lawrence, it made a shit ton of 10 best and 10 worst lists for 2021. But Tom has aged gracefully and has not tried to continue to play men in their 30s, men in their 40s as he's aged. And there is something to be said for the kind of eternal youthfulness of Tom Cruise, who, let's face it, Cruise is fucking unbelievable. I love the guy. But Tom Hanks, for example, in the movie Sully, working with Clint Eastwood, that's almost a decade ago now, 8-9 years ago, gives a great performance. He's so good in that movie. And that's a film that I feel like was somewhat slept on. More people should be exposed to. It is such a good movie and such a beautiful performance by Tom Hanks. And I saw A Man Called Otto, and the joke at the time was that Tom Hanks has moved into his Clint Eastwood phase, the kind of get off my lawn. But he's had such an amazing career, and he and Rita Wilson, his bride, they've been together about 35 years, and I believe they met, if I'm not mistaken, I think they met while he was making the movie Volunteers with John Candy. I think she was a co-star. So they've known each other just about 40 years, or maybe they have known each other 40 years, and I will say that Rita Wilson posted about him this morning. It's just a picture of him at his library, presumably at the family home, and looking a very mischievous look. He has that look that he used to get in movies when he was a kid, when he was young, movies like Dragnet. The face might age, but the sparkle in the eyes doesn't fade. And to see this guy who is a senior citizen, 3 years into being a senior citizen, still seeming to be so excited about making movies like Asteroid City and other films that he's done in recent years, he's the man. Every bit the Gary Cooper of his day, just a more talented, dramatic, and certainly more skilled comic actor. Happy 68th birthday to one of the unquestioned GOATs, Tom Hanks. This has been episode 242 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your Tuesday afternoon here with me in New York. And if you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with episode 243 real soon. Till then, peace.